your voice be louder. May your voice be clearer than all the others, than all the others. May your face be dearer. May your words be sweeter than all the others, than all the others in my life. Please keep my eyes fixed on you. Please root my heart so deep in you. Keep me abiding, keep me abiding, keep me abiding, that I may bear fruit. May your presence be truer. May your presence be nearer than all the others, than all the others. May your light burn brighter. May your love go deeper than all the others, than all the others in my life. Please keep my eyes fixed on you. Please root my heart so deep in you. Keep me abiding, keep me abiding, keep me abiding, that I may bear fruit. Please keep my eyes fixed on you. Please root my heart so deep in you. Keep me abiding, keep me abiding, keep me abiding, that I may bear fruit. Welcome, everybody. At home in your living rooms, probably still in your pajamas. We have a little team here, too, that's helping to put this together. So we had an amazing turnout last week, actually. We had people from at least 5 different states, 5 that we're aware of. And this is actually working a little better than what I thought it would, because mainly the interactions, the comments and stuff online, that really makes it feel like so much more than just a broadcast. It makes it feel like an actual community. So I'm really happy about that. I could almost hear some of you in your homes going, amen. You know who you are. Anyways, we're continuing our Counterculture series, and today's title is The Quiet Place. And it's based on a passage in Mark chapter 4. And I assure you, it's actually in Mark chapter 4. I know last week I said Philippians 12 and even put it on the slides, and there is no such thing as Philippians 12, so I'm not sure where that came from, but I assure you this is out of Mark 12 if you guys want to follow along. Last week we looked at how you can have peace even in the middle of hard circumstances, peace that transcends the circumstances. And I want to kind of continue in that vein simply because we really need to keep a right focus in this difficult season that we're experiencing. So let's open with a quick word of prayer, and then we'll jump in. God, just like that song said that we just sang, help us to hear your voice louder than all the other voices that are competing for our attention right now. Help us to quiet our souls long enough to hear from you. And God, would you teach us how to do that? Would you use this message to that end, God? We ask that your kingdom would break through the present circumstances, break through whatever's going on in our individual lives, whatever's occupying all our thoughts and energies, God. Let your kingdom break through that. Let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In Jesus' name, amen. Mark chapter 4, starting with verse 37. This is where Jesus was on a boat with the disciples, and it says that a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion, and the disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up and rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And they were terrified and said to each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So I'm guessing you guys have all heard this Bible story before. It starts with a storm. It says furious squall, which is just a windstorm. And the wind was driving the waves so big that it was threatening to sink the ship. Now, there's an obvious metaphor here with our current situation. That's the coronavirus and all the trouble that's bringing on us. And for that part, in the same way that Jesus could speak quiet and calm that storm, he can quiet this storm for us, and I believe he's going to. But there's another less obvious parallel between what we're experiencing and this Bible story. Our circumstances are definitely one storm, but there's another storm, a hidden storm, that I want to examine today. What intrigues me most about this passage is the difference in the demeanor between Jesus and the demeanor of the disciples. They were on the same boat, they were experiencing the same storm, but their response to that storm was completely different. The disciples had a storm going on in their heart. They were terrified. They thought that they were all going to die. That's why they said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" But notice something here. The boat's not actually sinking at this point. It was just the threat that, it was the fear of the boat sinking. That's the less obvious parallel to our current situation. It's what could happen. Not what's actually happening, we're not directly sinking. This virus is not causing our country to sink, at least not at this point. And here's some facts to prove that. In the United States last year, about 80,000 people died from the flu. 80,000. To date, in the United States, less than 1,200 people have died. This is as of Thursday when I did my research. Less than 1,200 people in the United States, and less than 23,000, less than 24,000, 23 something in the whole world have died from the coronavirus. So this virus has killed less people in the entire world up to this point than died from the flu in the United States alone last year. Now, I'm not saying that the current response to this situation is unwarranted. I'm not actually making any comment about that. I'll leave that to the experts to decide. But what I am saying is that this virus is not causing our boat to sink at this point. The concern is that it could make us sink. In other words, it's the threat that it could sink the boat, the proverbial boat. So in the response the disciples had in their situation, we saw that it was panic, right? They freaked out. They thought they were going to die. And that was actually a valid concern. But let's look at how Jesus responded to this. It says Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. It must have been one heck of a cushion. Either that or there was another reason why he had such peace in the middle of that storm. There was another reason. And that reason is he had learned to live in the quiet place. He learned the secret of the quiet place. And because of that, he was at peace. He was able to sleep even though he was being thrashed around, probably. Unless he had a really good cushion. You know, since our goal is to be like Jesus, shouldn't we learn how to experience peace in the middle of our storm? Because we actually can. We can experience quiet in the middle of the noise. And so that's what I want to look at today. I want to look at how we can experience that. We see two different responses in this Bible story to the same storm. And those were, one was being led by God, and one was being led by fear. So these are our two options to our storm right now. We can be led by God, or we can be led by fear. So let's take a few moments to just look at both options and explore them in the context of our own situation. Because I think as believers, we would all say, yeah, we want the first one. You know, I'm going to be led by God. But in reality, I think it's probably more likely that we react in the second one more often. So let's look at how all that works. First of all, let's explore being led by fear. There's actually a ton of stuff I could say about this topic, but I'm going to narrow it down to two things. And before I even jump into those two things, let me just say something that I actually mentioned last week. This is all about how we think. It's all about what we believe. You know, there's the reports, there's the threats, there's the reality of the situation, and then there's what we think and what we believe about the situation. I'm presenting to you, it's more important how we think about the situation. Because the mind is where spiritual warfare takes place. That's where the battle happens. And that leads into my first point. Well, being led by fear comes from demonic threats. So the Bible tells us in John 10:10 that the mission of the devil is to steal, kill, and destroy. That's his goal. That's what he's out to do. And one of his most effective ways of accomplishing that is to influence our thoughts, to influence our beliefs. And a great way to imagine how that works is a book called Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. You know, he has some really cool potential scenarios of how the devil influences thoughts. But think about how far-reaching that type of influence could be. Influencing thoughts. See, people worry about demons, you know. I don't want to go in that scary house because a demon might pop up. You know, I don't want to go in that dark basement because, you know, we have this inordinate fear of the devil like somehow, you know, physically appearing to us. as if just his appearing would be enough to stop our heart, probably, right? But I think we should be a lot more concerned about how he influences our thoughts. The devil comes as an angel of light, and he lures us with thoughts. For example, if I believe that life is hopeless, if I believe that, some terrible situation that I'm in is never going to end, and, if I believe life isn't worth living anymore, that belief may result in me taking my life. In fact, that happens all the time. Think about that. That is a result of what you believe and how you think. I'm not saying there's not other things involved, chemical and stuff like that, but this is definitely kind of the root of it, in my opinion. So the devil can kill people without even lifting his finger, if he has fingers. His proverbial finger. He doesn't even have to lift a finger. You do it to yourself. Or what if I believe that, I'm worthless? Well, then I'm probably going to act worthless, right? Or maybe even worse things would happen, But if the enemy can convince us that this pandemic is the apocalypse, well, at the very least, what's that going to cause? Fear. Lots of fear. Rampant fear. And the very minimum response of that fear is going to be incredible stress. And we know from modern science that stress is literally bad for your health, your physical health, mental health, emotional health. Fear is very destructive. And that's how evil works. That's why terrorism is so effective and so prevalent in our culture. Because they understand. If you can instill terror, then people aren't going to think straight. People don't think straight when they're under the influence of fear. That brings chaos. And chaos is where evil thrives. Fear does not come from God. God has not given us a spirit of fear, right? So I would just challenge you, be aware of the demonic threats. I think you probably already are. Even as I'm saying this, you're aware of the demonic threats that come at you. Well, just don't respond to them. Don't react. Don't act on that stuff. And one of the big areas that this fear is proliferated is through, and this is my second point, reports and information. That's kind of an awkward point, but what I mean by that, and what it's beyond just the news and social media and stuff like that, but that's going to be specifically what I'm talking about. It's really hard to talk about fear without talking about the influence of the media, because that's the source of most of our information. We say, no, I heard it from so-and-so. Well, where did so-and-so get it? They probably read it somewhere or heard it somewhere. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not against watching the news, but we just really have to understand where we keep that information and how we process it, what part of our heart it gets to occupy. And it's really important to just keep in mind what motivates the news cycles. What influences, the information cycles that we experience. When I was young, news would happen once a day, the evening news, it would happen, and their job was just to basically tell you what was going on in the world, right? That's not how it is anymore. See, now we have multiple news channels that go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And you know what? It's no longer just about telling you what's going on. In fact, the majority of what we receive from the news is opinion. It's people's opinions about what's going on. And you know why that is? It's what I just said. They have to have something to say 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Well, that's a lot of time to fill. So you can't just go, there was a fire in so-and-so. You can't do that. You got to go, and the reason there was a fire is because so-and-so did such and such, right? There's opinions attached. But what we really need to realize is that news channels are businesses. And their primary goal is to make money. That's their mission, right? Their mission is to be profitable, just like any other business. A restaurant, a construction, whatever. Their goal is to make as much money as possible. And if they are not driven by a moral code, if God is nowhere to be found in that scenario, then they're going to just do whatever it takes to make the most money possible. Listen, fear sells. You think sex sells? It does, but you know what? Fear sells. When it comes to the news, fear sells. It's no longer about what's true or what's right. It's about what's profitable. You want evidence that that's true? All you have to do is watch the cable news channels. They're literally right next to each other on your menu. Just switch back and forth a little bit, and you will get two completely different versions of the truth about the same story. You would think that they're both living on different planets. And typically, those two versions of the truth are motivated by a political ideology, one or the other. I really like to stay informed. I like to know what's going on in the world. But you know what? I have to work really hard to figure out what's truth and what's opinion. And you know what? Most of what we see, we're never going to have access to most of the truth about different situations. I know that from personal experience. There's been several times in my life where I was involved in situations that ended up on the news. At least one time, like the world news, and I was involved with that situation. Let me tell you, every time that happened, what was reported in the media was not accurate. Every single time it was inaccurate. So my encouragement to you is this. Be slow to buy into what you see in the media. Be slow to swallow it hook, line, and sinker. Take everything with a grain of salt that you hear. And remember these two things. First of all, remember, they have to fill 24 hours a day worth of talking. So they develop talking points. And they repeat those talking points ad nauseum. If you've ever watched the TV for like one news channel for any length of time, you notice they just repeat the same thing over and over and over, sometimes in different ways, sometimes they don't even change it up. And then typically what happens with people who watch the news a lot, they end up going out and parroting those talking points. They repeat those talking points that they've been hearing. And that makes them feel like they really know what's going on. I think we believe that we do know what's going on. I'm guilty of this. I've done this. Well, I just want to encourage you to be careful with what you repeat. There are truths buried in there, but when we just, carelessly repeat what we hear, I think we can unwittingly foster fear in ourselves and fear in other people. And we don't want to be used that way, do we? So let's be careful with that. And secondly, I'd encourage you to avoid spending hours upon hours watching the news, or especially with social media. Just don't do it. These news stories, the vast majority of the stuff I see on social media is garbage. There's like, it's just not true. And they have no accountability, because I could post it and it could go viral. I could just make something up. It could go viral. That's the nature of social media. So my encouragement to you is find a source of news that you trust a little bit. Get the bullets, find out what's going on in the world, and then find something else to do, Because media makes you feel like you're busy doing something really important. But the truth is, the vast majority of it is completely unproductive. You're not productive when you're watching the news. So that's just some opinions about things, but the Spirit would say this to you. Trust God more than you trust the media. Listen to God more than you listen to media. If we spend even half of the time with God, listening to God, as we do listening to media, we would be a lot more powerful as Christians. So listen to God. That's my second point, actually, is be led by God. And there's just 3 things I want to touch on really quickly. First of all, know God's voice. You can't be led by God if you don't hear from him, if he has no way of communicating. I know the written word is a primary way. But we're in Mark 4, really. We really are in Mark 4. Earlier from the story that we just read, I think it's verse 24, Jesus said, consider carefully what you hear. Consider carefully what you hear. I was kind of just talking about that. Be careful what you allow yourself to take in with the media and stuff like that. But Jesus was talking about being careful what you hear from God. See, he's warning us that sometimes what we hear, we tend to run it through our filters. Read Mark 4. It's in there. We run this stuff through our filters. That keeps us from hearing him accurately or at all. That's why in verse 23 he says, anyone who has ears, let him hear. Because not everyone has ears to hear, right? See, the way we hear things is a reflection of our character. Did you ever think of it that way? The way we hear things is a reflection of our character. We hear what we want to hear. We hear the way we want to hear. And the truth is, we're almost never aware of that bias that we have. But believe me, it's there. For example, if deep down inside you really don't want to know what God has to say about something, let me repeat that. If deep down inside you don't want to hear what God has to say about something, you won't hear it. Even if up here on the surface, like I said, we all think we want to hear what God has to say about something. We all want to be led by God. But if there is deep parts, and trust me, there is in all of us, that maybe don't want to hear what God has to say, we won't hear it. That's actually what it means in verse 12. They may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Did you ever wonder what that meant? That's what it means. If you don't know God, you won't know his voice. You can't, in a moment of crisis, all of a sudden turn on that radio station and listen to what God has to say. You have to be the kind of person that receives that is able to hear. You have to have ears that hear, spiritual ears that hear. Jesus said, it's my sheep that listen to my voice. My sheep know my voice. I know them and they follow me. Sheeple. You have to be a sheeple to hear God. This is the church. These are his sheeples. So, if you really want to be led by God rather than being led by fear, the only way to do that is to hear God's voice. To know God's voice so that you can hear it. And the only way to know God's voice is to know God. There isn't any shortcuts to that. Think about it in human terms. If you really want to get to know somebody, you will. You'll spend time with them. You'll call them. You'll go over. Don't go over. Social distancing. If you really want to get to know God, you will. He's not hiding from you. So I would encourage you to really seriously pursue understanding how to hear from God. Pursue that. Don't wait for someone to tell you. God says you will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with your whole heart. That's the voice of the Lord through a prophet. So put some effort into that. We've done dozens of sermons on that topic. And actually, let me recommend one amazing resource for that. There's a book called Hearing God by Dallas Willard. It's amazing. I'd highly recommend it, and be prepared to read the sentences more than once. Next, if you want to be led by God, you need to know your calling. See, one of the reasons Jesus was so completely unconcerned with dying on that boat was because he knew his calling. He knew his calling. He knew how he was going to die, and it wasn't on a boat. Right? He knew God had a mission for him, and he knew that until that mission was finished, nothing was going to take him out. He knew that. He was so confident in that, he was sleeping soundly. There's an interesting dynamic that I've noticed with people. It's that the more they live for God's purpose in their life, the more they abandon their own agenda and live for God, the less afraid they are of dying. That's why, think about some of the missionaries. You know what I mean? You know, they go to countries where, people kill and eat you if they don't know you. And they just go without fear. It's not because they're stupid. It's not because they don't think that they could die. They're probably confident that's a good possibility. And they go anyway. They're not afraid of death. Paul said, to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Try that one on. But if you're living just for yourself, for your security, safety, comfort, pleasure, then yeah, you're probably very afraid to die, because you have the illusion that you have a lot more to lose here. I heard a story of an actor who, really famous actor, all of you would recognize her name. She was a train wreck emotionally and spiritually. And she was involved in all kinds of self-destructive behavior. And then somewhere in her spiral, she decided to get involved in this mission. She got inspired, and she plugged into this mission. and she dedicated a large part of her life to it. It was something where she was completely had to be unselfish, altruistic. It had to be, and in doing this, which was saving others, she actually saved herself, and her entire life turned around. Listen, if you want to be led by God rather than led by fear, find out what God made you for. Find out your purpose and commit yourself to that. Abandon yourself to that. And finally, know your destiny. Jesus wasn't afraid of dying in that boat because he knew where he was going to go when he died. He knew what his destiny was. It's like, bring it. But see, if you don't have that hope, if you're not confident in that, of course you're afraid to die. Of course something like the COVID-19 virus is going to terrify you. So I just have a couple more minutes. We have these two parallels in this story about Jesus. First of all, it's the wind and the waves. It's the circumstances. It's what's actually happening and the problems that creates. We have the coronavirus. People are actually dying from it. Our economy is in trouble because of it. Personal economy and nation and global economy, really. Again, I strongly believe God can and will speak to that. Quiet, be still. But then there's the threat of what could happen. There's the storm in our hearts. There's the fear that the whole ship could sink, meaning the world could end. This could be the apocalypse. I've literally heard that this week. It could result in the loss of all the cargo, which, the parallel to that is we could lose all our resources. Renovate could lose our building. We could personally die. And to that, Jesus has to speak to that storm in our hearts and say, quiet, be still. Be still and know that I am God. And your life is in my hands, even though you can't feel it or perceive it. Your life is in my hands if you belong to me. So the question is, and it's the most important question in the universe, do you belong to him? And if you're not sure of that, let's talk. Call me. I'm available. This is the most important thing in the world. Talk to someone else who you know has a strong walk with the Lord. I want to close kind of similar to how we did last week with an original song. This one is called The Quiet Place, so it fits perfectly with what I'm talking about today. But this one is a live video recording that we did a while ago. Let me just say a couple words about the song. I've never been a very big fan of traditional hymns. To me, they always represented some kind of traditional, stagnant thing. And I know it's not that way for everyone. Some people, they find their greatest expression of worship through that. And that's great. That's just not how it was for me ever. But this song is written as a hymn. And God gave it to me as a hymn, clearly. As I'm penning the words, I was getting words like thy and shall, like King James. It's a King James song. So when I worked with the guy who's playing piano on this, I told him, I really want this to feel like a hymn. And the honest truth is, like I said, that's not my thing, but I felt like it was what God gave me. So there's something sacred about it. There's some kind of reverence about it. So I say all that just to say, if you, like me, don't like hymns, I just want to encourage you, get past that and really listen closely to the lyrics, because I strongly believe that it will minister to you powerfully in this season and what's going on, especially if you let it give voice to what your soul is going through. Release thy tension, furrowed brow, let all thy troubles pass. For in the kingdom coming down shall peace be known at last. Weary body racked with pain, in thy suffering, all thy losses count as gain compared to Christ the King. Be still, my soul, be still, my soul, be still. That He is God. Why so downcast, O my soul? Put hope in God again. Oh,